So in this video, we're going to be looking at solving basic linear equations of the form ax plus b equals c. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind you of a couple things from the previous video. One of them, remember that our goal is to always isolate the variable. So everything we do in terms of solving an equation is all about getting that x or y or w all by itself on one side of the equation. So isolating that variable. And then remember, the way we do that is we use those opposites. We use that addition and subtraction being opposite, and we use that multiplication and division being opposite. And that's kind of the way math, especially solving equations, is really focused in on, is using those opposites to create that isolation of our variable. So I have a few examples that I've picked out of this section, and here we go. So for our first example, you'll see we have 8w plus 2 equals negative 8. Notice that we only have one w, so all of our w's are actually already together on one side, so we don't have to worry about that. We're just trying to, again, isolate that w. So the first thing we typically always want to move away from our w is our constant number. In that case, our constant number is 2. Since it's plus 2, we're going to use our subtraction, so we're going to subtract 2. And remember, whatever I do to one side of the equation, I have to do the exact same thing to the other side, so I'm going to subtract 2 from that side as well. So now over here on the left, my 2's are going to cancel each other out, so I'm going to have 8w equals a negative 10. Remember, when you're working with negatives as far as addition and subtraction goes, it's kind of like talking about money. So I owe you $8 and I borrow an additional $2 from you, so now I owe you $10. Okay, so now we've got the 8w all by itself. The next thing we want to do is get rid of that 8. Whenever we see a number directly next to a letter, remember back in the last section, that's a multiplication. So the opposite of multiplication is division. And we're going to divide both sides by 8. So we get this, that w, because our 8's are going to cancel here, and w equals negative 10 over 8. Now the only thing that we have to do here is when we have something like negative 10 over 8, we need to reduce that down to its lowest format. So in this particular case, both 10 and 8 are divisible by 2. So we're going to divide each the top and the bottom of this fraction by the number 2. And that's going to give us that w equals negative 5 over 4. And this would be our final answer. You can also, if you don't want to put it in fraction form, you can divide that out and do negative 5 divided by a positive 4. And you would get that w equals negative 1.25. Either one of these answers is correct. The big thing on the decimals is you want to make sure you round it to 2 decimal places. This one was pretty easy because it terminates after 2. It's 2.25. But if it goes past 2 decimal places, you always want to round to that second decimal place. Okay, so for our next example, we have 5y minus 17 equals negative 17. Again, it's very similar to the problem that we just did. We have our y's all together on the left-hand side, so the first thing we want to move away is that constant. So in this case, we have a minus 17. Again, always thinking opposite. The opposite of subtraction is addition. So we are going to add 17 to both sides of our equation. Again, we're going to have our 5y and our 17's are going to cancel each other out. And then negative 17 plus 17. So I owe you $17 and I pay you back $17. So I don't owe you any money, that's 0. And a lot of times people want to stop the problem right here and say that this has no solution. But remember, 0 is a perfectly fine answer. So we're going to continue to work this problem. We're going to say, okay, well now we want to get rid of that 5. We're going to divide both sides by 5. And again, y, because our 5's here are canceling each other out. And then 0 divided by 5, that means I have no money and I have 5 friends. So my friends don't get any money. So that would be y equals 0. And remember, 0 is a perfectly fine answer. So in this case, y equals 0. So for our third example, we have 0 equals 4x minus 32. And I wanted to do this one for a couple reasons. One, we have it equal to 0, which kind of sometimes throws some people off. But the other thing is, notice that my x is actually on the right-hand side of my equation instead of on the left-hand side. And that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong that says that x has to be on the right or left. The biggest thing, again, is making sure we identify that variable and then moving everything away from him. So again, I want to move my constant, and my constant that's on my side with my variable is this 32. It's minus or subtracting 32, so the opposite would be to add the 32 to both sides. If I have 0 amount of money and I add 32 to that, I still have 32 equals 4x, and then these 32s are canceling each other out. And again, the same concept, I need to get rid of everything with my x, so this time I need to get rid of that 4. So we're going to divide both sides by 4. 32 divided by 4 is 8. So 8 equals x, since our 4's canceled each other out. So for our next example, again, same type of problem, just added some decimals in here to make sure we understand how to work with those decimals. My z, again, is back over on the left-hand side of my equation. Again, doesn't really matter what side it is. I just need to make sure I identify which side of my equation it's on. And then I'm wanting to move everything away from him. So again, I want to move my constant. My constant is this 7.3. Again, it's subtraction, so we are going to add 7.3 to both sides. Now, when you add this, if you're going to do the addition by hand, make sure that you line the 6 and the 7 up, because this 6 is really 6.0, and whenever we add or subtract decimals, we always want to make sure our decimal points are lined up so we add them correctly. And you can use a calculator if you want, but I just want to make sure if you're doing it by hand that you line up those decimal places. So now we have negative 1.9z. Our 7.3s are canceling like they should, and then 6.0 plus 7.3 is 13.3. Again, making sure those decimals are lined up and you're adding the 6 and 7 since those are the whole numbers together. Again, same thing here. We need to get rid of this negative 1.9, so we are going to divide by negative 1.9 on both sides. Again, these guys are going to cancel each other out, as they should. That's going to leave me with that z equals. Now again, if you want to do the division by hand, by all means, please go ahead. You can actually do this in the calculator as well. So we would just do 13.3 divided by a negative 1.9, which would end up giving us negative 7. Just a word of caution on your division in the calculator. Please make sure that instead of using the subtraction sign to make that 1.9 negative, you're actually using that plus or minus sign. It's a button that looks like this on your calculator with the plus or minus right above each other. That actually is what you want to use to change that to a negative number. If you use the subtraction sign, what you're going to end up doing is actually subtracting the numbers and not dividing them like you want to. So just kind of be cautious on that. If you have any questions about that, let me know. So for our last question that we're going to work for this section, we have 9x plus 15 equals 0. Again, x's are over on the left-hand side, so that means I want to move everything else over to the right, starting with my constant, which is going to be this positive or adding 15. Since it's addition, the opposite is to subtract 15 from both sides. When we do that, again, I've got my 9x still. My 15s are canceling each other out. And then I have no money, and I borrow $15, so I owe $15. That's going to be that negative 15. Again, now I'm wanting to get rid of that 9 in front of the x. It's multiplication, so the opposite is division. We're going to divide both sides by 9. And x is going to equal negative 15 over 9. But again, I can't just say that it's negative 15 over 9. I need to reduce that. Both the negative 15 and 9 are divisible by 3. So we're going to come in here and divide out a 3, top and bottom. And that is going to give us x equals negative 5 over 3. And this would be my final answer. Again, if you wanted to, you could divide this out into a decimal representation. Negative 5 over 3 is the same thing as x equals negative 1.67. Again, making sure to round to that second decimal place. And this would be my other answer. Again, and it doesn't matter. If you want to leave it in the fraction form, you can do that. If you would prefer to put it in decimal format, you can do that as well.